Hi, it's Helen Tarrant. Find out about your tenants. So understand your tenants, and your job is to work with your tenant to actually make them happy tenants and make sure they stay in your property for the long term. So how long has your tenant been in the property? I Google search and stalk my tenants for a while. I visit their business as a customer if I can, or I send someone else to. So when I bought the beauty salon and in Rockhampton, I sent one of my friends who lived in Rockhampton. I said, go down there, have a massage, have a facial, chat to the lady, see how her business is going. When one of my students bought they bought dollars and cents in Childers, we sat outside the shop and just watch the traffic of people going through. So visit their property. I mean, you don't have to. I've got students who haven't seen their property at all, have bought it sight unseen, all the numbers stacked up, they've just gone and bought it. And these are, anything from an office space to a freestanding building with multiple tenants in there. So it is entirely up to you, but when you first start the process, I do encourage you to actually go and see the property. Find out as much about the competition in the market. So there might be 5 coffee shops around the corner. How is that going to affect you? Because one of the things that happens in commercial property in certain areas is that, and I'll use Townsville as an example, is that Townsville had a mining boom, had an area where they had a lot of work come through the area, and what happened was that their 3 gyms all of a sudden becomes 8 gyms. So, but the area itself cannot support that. The local population cannot support that. Right now, they're going through that. They're going backwards in the terms of the gym, because they need to go back to having 3 to 4 gyms because the population isn't there. The same thing happened in Gladstone. They had an extra 50, 60,000 people a year come through during the mining boom, which meant there was a boom of a lot of cafes and restaurants in the area, which now have all closed down because there is not enough demand. So that's what I mean about the competition and that supply in the market. Is it a small business, a family business, a medium-sized business? Now, they're all good. It doesn't mean that we just want a national or ASX listed company. A small family business is just as good as one of these large businesses, depending on how long they've been there and what kind of work they're in. Now, one of the things you'll find that with large tenants, and we've had large tenants in our building, we've had Rivers as one of our tenants, so they're a large multinational tenant. We've had Ricoh as our tenant, they're a national copier tenant. One of the things with national tenants is that they're an aggressive tenants. They know their rights, they've got a legal team, they will negotiate hard on every single term of the lease. They will have their own standard lease. I've got a student who's recently getting Orica into her property, and that was a long-term negotiation because they've got their own specific standards your property needs to adhere to, and they put a lot of pressure on you as a landlord compared to a small business where they may not be so savvy with their lease, but they're quite happy to give you a personal guarantee, a bond, give you actually in terms more security. Just tell you a story about our Rivers. Rivers got taken over by another large corporation who owns quite a few of the retail group. And what they did was they came to us, they were in the middle of a lease. They came to us and said, now our head office made a decision, we're pulling out of regional. So our property was in Singleton, Upper Hunter Valley region, and then we decided to pull out regional. We still have 15 months to go on the lease, but let's just give you 3 months and call it quits. I was like, I don't think so. I don't think so. Need I remind you about the legal obligation under your lease? But that's what they do, that they will come to you and do that. It took us 3 months to fight them to say, right, no, you have a legal obligation under the lease. You will not only fulfill your obligation to pay us out of the lease, but you will bring the premise back to scratch because there's a make good clause in that lease. So if we were inexperienced and we were just our first time owning a commercial property, we would be scared if their lawyers got on the phone and said to us and wrote us aggressive letters and said, no, we are exiting and we would break the lease and all of this stuff. But it's about working through with them about that. If they did pay us out, so we gave them 3 months leeway and they paid us 12 months. They paid us 12 months, they brought their workers in and they completely refurbished our property. They gave back a new property and they gave us $60,000. So the lease is absolutely enforceable, and the lease is absolutely enforceable in your favour as the landlord, which is one of the reasons I like about commercial property, is that you as the landlord actually have a lot of protection under the lease. So as long as you know how to enforce it and what the clauses are. So it doesn't mean having a national tenant. Most people think having a national tenant is going to be fantastic because they pay on time and they're secure. But they can also be on the other end very, very aggressive. Whereas we've had mums and dad businesses in there, have fish and chip shops, and the mum and dad fall sick and they're behind in rent. I go, that's fine. This is the payment plan. You've got to come up with this payment plan to make sure you catch up, and they do their best. They're not there to screw you over, and they're just suggesting, look, I'm going to sell my business. So I've worked with a tenant of mine in Seymour who had a fish and chip shop, been there for 9-10 years. The mother falls sick, she's in hospital, they're not able to make their rent. So the family gets in, they're all chipping in, they're making repayments on the rent. Even though they're making the rent and then an extra $100 a week to try to catch up on it, and eventually they go, we're trying to sell the business. It was a 6-month period. They sold the business. They've paid out what they owe us, and then we've got a new lease with a new tenant. So mums and dads are not there to screw you over just because they're everyday business. They actually really try to make good on what they promised you. And it's important for you to have that understanding to work with them through that process as well. So they're no less a secure tenant for us than some of a national corporation. So personal guarantee if it's a small business, that's really important because that allows you to have a bit more security if something happens to your tenant. In large businesses, they won't give you a guarantee, they won't give you a bond. That's a typical large, so if you've got a bank, insurance company, anything that's national, there's no bond and no guarantee. So everything depends on the lease. And I look at how much the bond and the rental guarantee is in comparison to the property. So if I've got a tenant in there for 10 years and they're giving me a 1-month bond, I'm going to be thinking, okay, this is a little bit short for me to have security in my property.